Hey students, Eric Magidson here. I promised you a video for lesson 2. Sorry this is late. I've been trying all afternoon to download a new version of Windows Server 2008 R2 from the MSD and Academic Alliance. It failed 3 times, and y'all know how long those downloads can be, so very frustrating. I've turned something into technical support. I was hoping to get a VBox up and show y'all how to A, install it, and B, implement Active Directory through that as some examples. But instead, I'm going to give you this boring presentation and follow up as soon as I get the download with some examples. So, of course, implementing Active Directory, we're going to talk about installing a new Active Directory into a forest. With the very first server in our very first domain, of course, it becomes the forest root, as well as the initial domain controller. So, to do that, we can go in and first of all we need to install all the tools that are required for Active Directory. So that's going to be the DNS role, the Active Directory Domain Services role, perform all the system diagnostics, configure system services, and then drill down if there's anything specific that you're going to need. Now remember, through Server Manager we can always go add additional components, so keep that in mind. So here's an example of Server Manager, of course, and we're going to go into roles here. Right here, we're going to go in there, open that up, and find the role we need. So simply put, Active Directory can run on any version of the server except for web. So Standard Edition, Enterprise Data Center, and of course, any of the cores. So one of the reasons that Server Core, as I've mentioned in class, has become so popular is we're able to take older servers where running the graphical user interface would weigh down on the server's performance. We can run Core, we can then install an Active Directory domain controller and really utilize older software, as well as purchase real lean software to save money and time. We of course need a admin account, and NTFS is required as the file system, so that we can install the NT sysvol to it. 200 meg minimum. Today, disk space just isn't an issue. So free space for the transaction log files. Quickly want to mention, if we're talking about a large Active Directory implementation, we might want to put those transaction logs on another partition to speed up the process, especially on Monday mornings when everybody's trying to log in. So something to keep in mind. Of course, we need TCP/IP, we need DNS for the service records, and we're ready to roll. So installing Active Directory, we just go in there to Server Manager, we say add new roles, and we pick Active Directory Domain Services. The supporting roles for domain services are also going to be installed for Active Directory, so it will install those as well. We can see that that's now a role that's installed. This is a blank server with no roles thus far, so a clean installation. Always like to do that. So add a domain controller to an existing domain, through DC promo. When we run DC promo, that's how we actually create a domain controller. So although we've installed the services, we then have to run DC promo. So we can create an entirely new forest structure. Remember, if we look back and think back about the graphics I put on the board, remember we need an initial forest, but then we can put autonomous domains in that forest. We can put child domains. We can create a new domain tree. You name it. So here's what we would pick. If this is a new domain, we would come down here and say create a new domain and a new forest. So that's the brand new first installation. Or we can do existing forest, controller to an existing domain. So this is what we would choose if we're doing, say, a secondary controller. Or create a new domain in an existing forest. This is where we want to create an additional tree in the same forest. Hopefully by now you have done some additional research. You've gone out to YouTube. There's some great videos, explaining Active Directory, etc., so that you are understanding a little bit, being able to see those trees through the forest. So, post-installation tasks. Well, application directory partition is created, aging and scavenging for zones. Remember, we want DNS to remain current. So forward and lookup zones and service records for AD have initially been created, reverse lookup zones, etc. So domain DNS zones, single partition allows DNS information to be replicated to all domain controllers running DNS within the domain. So remember, we not only need domain controller redundancy, but we also need DNS redundancy. If we're doing DHCP, we want DHCP redundancy. So if I know Microsoft doesn't like me using this term, our primary or initial domain controller goes down, we have those other items available while we fix it. So aging and scavenging is a process that can be used by Windows Server DNS to clean up the DNS database after DNS records become stale or out of date. So again, the smaller that record set, the quicker things are going to happen, resolution, finding resources, etc. So without the process, require manual maintenance to prevent server performance degradation and potential disk space issues. DNS can grow really quickly. Think about all the things that get put into DNS as we expand our Active Directory domain. So aging and scavenging, by default, 7 days. We can, in large organizations, we might want to take that down depending on how many changes are being made. But for the most part, 7 days is pretty darn good for most Active Directory implementations. DNS records, so make sure forward lookup zones created, those host record is created. You're going to look at a lot of this in your labs. DNS domains are created, so sites and TCP and UDP all created. So if we want, we can go into DNS, so through the DNS management tool, okay, and go in and look at the records, make sure things are starting to populate accordingly. We then raising the domain functional level. So remember, we talked about this. Our domain functional level you see here is Windows Server 2003 in this example, which means not only are we installing a 2008 server, but we have an older 2003 and we can only run at the functional level of our oldest server. So we can raise that. If we're starting a new domain and it's all going to be Server 2008 R2, raise it up. So raising the forest, open Active Directory domains and trusts, that's where it's done. You got to be an administrator, of course. Right-click the Active Directory domain and raise the functional level there. Remember, this is one of those things that you can raise it, but you cannot go back. So domains have not all been raised to at least the Server 2003. You'll receive an error indicating that raising the forest functional level cannot take place, right? If all domains have met the domain functionality criteria of 2008, you can then raise and proceed. So removing Active Directory, same way we installed it, we can remove it. DC promo. Keep in mind that as of, basically today, once you get a domain up and running, changing the name of the domain has been next to impossible. So we tried this a couple times a few years ago and never was successful. It's because DNS and everything holds that record of that domain, whatever your domain name is. So very complex to do. You could remove the domain, but remember, removing it, as it says here, is going to completely wipe it out. So not a good idea. Unless for some reason you're just playing around, you want to remove the domain. My suggestion is use our VBox and just don't save the changes. And you can go ahead and create domains all you want, just don't save the changes, and you can reuse your virtual machines. So schema management, commercial applications such as Microsoft Exchange will modify the schema as part of their installation process. So of course, we've got to have schema admin group to do that, be a member of that group. The initial administrator account that you create is part of that schema group. And remember, as we discussed in class, third-party applications, large ERP systems that are running on a Windows Server network environment, CRM systems are integrating with Active Directory. Single sign-on, single point of security. So installing schema management snap-in tool, by default, this tool is not installed by default because, as we've discussed in class, you shouldn't be in there playing unless you know exactly what you're changing. So there's how we get it. We can go into regserve32, run the schema management DLL, and it will open up in an MMC. Trust relationships. So trust relationships exist to make resource accessibility easier between domains and forests. Remember, we can have that cross-forest transitive trust. So if we buy a company with another Active Directory domain, we can create that forest trust to start sharing resources between the forests. We can share resources between domains. And of course, by default, resources when we create a child domain are shared downward. In order to do upward, we need to create the permissions to do so. Trust relationships are established by default during the creation of the Active Directory forest structure. So as we put new domains and child domains in, those trusts are automatically created for you. You can, however, go modify trusts. So shortcut trusts, these are things you should know. Manually established in Windows, used to shorten the tree walking process for users who require frequent access to resources elsewhere in the forest. Cross-forest trust, there's the one I was talking about, allows you to create a two-way transitive trust between separate forests. External trust, used to configure a one-way non-transitive trust. Remember what transitive trust means? If not, yep, that's right, Google it. Get to understand these different trusts. And realm trusts allows you to configure trust relationships between Server 2003 and Unix Kerberos. So we can run those Unix machines and share resources from them onto our Windows Active Directory domain. Revoking a trust, pretty simple. Trust domain name, trust, and then remove. Repeat the steps for other trust relationships. UPN, the name of a system user in an email address format. So user principal name is essentially a user's email and name in email format. So based on the Internet RFC standard 822. So again, by having these standards, that's where we can start using these across platforms. Default suffix for user principal names, we can go in and do that if you'd like. My suggestion is it's fine the way it is, but you may have applications or Linux or Unix requirements that might require a change. So this is how we can go in and do that. So, key more than one suffix in your forest, has more than one tree, and then OK. And then a few pages of summary. So we've pretty much gone through this. Remember, we've got to make sure that DNS is up and running. Active Directory is very specific. Needs DNS in order to run. Okay, hope this helps. I will see you all soon.